So good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to SERA's latest Fringe. It's been a busy schedule for the team so far and they've been smashing it out of the park. My name's Rishi Madlani. I'm a councillor in Bloomsbury and I chair all of London's pension schemes for my sins, but I have 20 years of working experience in climate finance, 500 megawatts of renewables in my youth, and so passionate about this topic because one of the bits that always used to frustrate me was how we couldn't get some of our projects connected to grid, and there were so many opportunities for investment and growth in the UK that wasn't there. We've got an incredible panel today, so to confirm you are here for the Let's Talk About Flex, how do we build the energy system of the future today. If you're not, you can leave politely and we will let you leave. I'm introduce my fantastic panel very briefly, and then we're going to go straight into some of the questions and discussion. And please do prepare for your questions because we want this to be as engaging and interactive as possible. So to my right, I have Chris Norbury, who's the CEO of E.ON. Fantastic career across the space here. Joined E.ON for over 10 years, but has been CEO since for 2 years now and fighting strong.
Nearly three.
Nearly three, coming up to three. Leonie Cooper is both my colleague and my friend, an assembly member at the GLA, councillor in Wandsworth, and is here today as the chair of the environmental committee at City Hall. To my left, we have Gillian Cooper, who is director of energy at Citizens Advice. Again, a fantastic organisation that does so much work in helping people who are at the sharp end of this spectrum. And to my far left, but not in any other political terms, Bragg, who is CEO of AD Demand, who is an expert in the energy sector and leads the policy work there across there. So we've decided to go straight into some of the questions and discussions. So please indicate if you want to come in on the question and I'll try and bring you in, and then we will definitely throw open to questions to the audience. So please be prepared, get your thinking caps on. What do you want to ask this fantastic audience? So it's very clear some of the benefits of energy flexibility are what they are and why we need them. Why is it so difficult to deliver this model across the nation? What do the panellists see as the key barriers and facilitators? Do you want to start first, Caroline? And then continue.
Yeah, sure. So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a nice conference. You are almost there, right? You've got about a day left. So, I guess from our perspective, there are a few key things that really need to happen to unlock flexibility and realise the 12 gigawatts that we need by 2030 and is in Clean Power by 2030 and the recently published Clean Flexibility Roadmap. Now, first thing, we have seen strategies for flexibility before, right? None of us is new to this game. What really needs to happen now to turn a really nice strategy into actual delivery is strong leadership and accountability that is led by DESNZ and brings together Ofgem and NISO, which will play a critical role going forward. Secondly, the markets that we have are outdated and are blocking access to returning money and savings on people's energy bills to households, businesses and industry in this country. That's made even more important by the decision that we've recently made on the future of wholesale markets and how we manage particularly curtailment of renewables. We need to make sure that particularly the markets that we use to balance the system, things like the balancing mechanism, for example, and others, are fit for purpose and allowing small assets and consumer-led flexibility to take their rightful role. And then thirdly, the really important thing, I think, beyond that, is that it's not only our markets that are outdated, it is the way that we think about the energy system and the underlying systems that support it. We still have a situation where NISO is unable to efficiently dispatch millions of assets that can keep the lights on going forward. And our conversation around flexibility is still stuck in a sort of niche over here type situation, rather than really realising the mainstream central role it's going to play. And then finally, I'll just leave. I think we have always thought about electricity, heat, etc. as very, very siloed. All of those silos are breaking down. We need to understand that there is a huge potential to draw on as we electrify the bulk of our heating in our homes, our businesses, and even our industrial processes. And the way in which we harness that to reduce costs across the whole system is going to be crucial to our ongoing social mandate for net zero and the energy transition.
Fantastic. That's a nice segue to Chris, I think, to come in on what is E.ON's perspective on this.
It's pretty difficult talking after Caroline.
I'll mix it around. We'll give it a chance.
She's just said everything I was going to say. So, I don't want it to be one of those things where we just violently agree with each other as well. So, I mean, look, it's a topic that's particularly important to me personally. So, why is that? You say that the case is well understood, but I'm not sure that's always true. At its heart, then, for me, flexibility and a more flexible, decentralised energy system in which people have the opportunity to participate, an opportunity to unlock the value of their consumption, is the way that we can square the circle, particularly acute in today's public discourse, that we can square the circle of how do you deliver an energy transition in such a way that the overall system cost is affordable, and B, do so in such a way that brings people's bills down meaningfully in the short term. That's the reason to do it, and that's the reason to love it. In addition to the things that Caroline said, I think some of the things that we need to do better at collectively as an industry, and perhaps we need to do better at collectively within government, is how do you make sure that the flex propositions that you take to market, particularly for consumer flex, are really simple, really easy to understand, really engaging. That on the one hand, they don't require a whole level of sophistication on the part of the customer to understand what that proposition is, and that's about how you use technology to enable that. And at the same time, they actually deliver real meaningful benefits, and that's about some of the points that Caroline made in terms of how you can then trade those propositions in the market, which is about the technical capability we have. So the customer proposition, really important. I think then, alongside that, ultimately, sticking with consumer flex for a minute, consumer flex ultimately requires, people, customers, communities to have energy assets in the home. So, how do you, in part it requires that. So how do you get more assets into the homes of more low-income families, more economically, more quickly? So how do you make sure that it's the people who need the benefit of shifting when they consume energy, of storing their own energy and generating their own energy and benefiting from flexibility? How do you ensure that the people who need the bill saving are the people who get the opportunity first and get the opportunity most quickly? Because a world of kind of trickle-down economics, if it works at all, it will take forever. And, so that, look forward to seeing the Warm Homes Plan. Look forward to seeing solar and battery as a core component of that. Look forward to seeing the market reform that we need in order to be able to enable those customers to participate in the market and benefit from those bill savings. So there is, thought that's required in terms of how do we get energy assets into the hands of those people who need the benefit most quickly. And then, in doing that, I think there's then a topic that sits alongside it, which is you have to accept that that no matter how well you target it will take time. So then how do you then start to create the type of propositions in the market? How do you start to be able to trade flexibility, trade demand shifting in the market for customers who don't have the benefit and can't afford the upfront capital cost of energy assets? So, other options are available, but there's a proposition that we brought to market earlier this year, which I always call Flex for All, but Ramona at the back will tell me what the actual proposition name is. But this is a intelligent demand shifting tariff for customers who don't have energy assets. We can start to capture the value of that in our trading desk. We share the value of that in all of it with the customers if they shift the time at which they consume energy. And then, time of use tariffs have been with us for a long time. But this, given the technology you've got today, we've got to hook up with Amazon, with the Alexa, which if you've got one, it will start to nudge you to shift the time of use, et cetera, et cetera. It's the stupidest version of a time of use tariff that you will ever see. Tomorrow it will be smarter, it will be more intelligent. So, customer propositions, energy assets in the home of the people who need the benefit most quickly, And how do you develop flex propositions for those people who don't have energy assets in the home such that they can benefit from flexibility at any stage of the journey of life that they're in, whilst ever they're an electricity consumer.
Fantastic. And your point about simplification and making it really easy for consumers, I think we've all gone through the hell of renegotiating either our mobile phone contract or energy contract and working out what is the best tariff. This has to be simple, otherwise we are not going to engage consumers on this. It has to be straightforward. Gillian, do you want to give a bit more of a perspective from the end users you see?
So in terms of what we see, we're obviously in a position where bills have settled at a level that it's about 60% higher than they were pre-crisis. So, and energy affordability is a big part of most people's lives at the moment. Concern about it runs right up the income scale. But it's obviously the biggest factor for those on the lowest incomes, and energy debt is the single biggest debt that people come to Citizens Advice with at the moment. So there's big challenges, and that we've got to be alive to that. So, I mean, we do see massive opportunities for flexibility because of the ability to lead to lower bills. And I think in terms of what we want to see from the products and services coming to market, we need options aimed at different types of households. There's obviously more challenges to taking up flexibility if you live in a rented property, if you live in a flat. The biggest gains at the moment can typically be made by people who live in owner-occupied houses that have the capital to be able to provide assets, and we need to change that. And I think sort of some of the programs Chris has mentioned are a start in doing that. We definitely need more innovators and companies in this space willing to market products to all types of people. I think we need to make sure that people have access to independent advice and support throughout all of this process as well. Particularly when you think about sort of some of the households that face more barriers than others, we need to make sure that they have the confidence to be able to take up these new products and services, and having access to independent advice really can help. And obviously we need to get more smart meters into the home as well, because you do need a smart meter in order to really benefit from this. And I guess the other aspect at the end, which again is key to improving consumer confidence and their willingness to take up these tariffs, is consumer protections. We have a long track record, unfortunately, in this company is sort of often fixing consumer protections after there's been a consumer scandal. I think, we can get ahead of this. One of the things we quite like is potentially introducing a consumer duty, which already operates in the financial services sector. Given how complex some of the new sort of products and services will be, I think having sort of an onus on companies to kind of think across the piece about what impact this will have on their customers might really be transformative and give people the confidence, particularly those on lower incomes or who face more barriers, the opportunity to take a leap and start to benefit from flexibility.
Thank you, Gillian. And last but by no means least, and I'm assuming no relation to Gillian.
We might be. Who knows? It's a bit like saying, is someone called Smith related to someone called Smith? That's not quite as frequent a name. So in a previous life, before I arrived in City Hall and became the lead on energy and environment, one of the roles that I used to have was doing energy advice to social housing tenants, and getting people to engage with changing their current arrangements is really, really difficult. And there's actually been a lot of research done that shows that when people have just moved house, when they've just got married, when they've just had a baby, when some other aspect of their life has changed, that's a really good time to get to them. So trying to identify when people are moving in, and then giving them all those really strong messages about their new house, where the bins were, how to divide up the recycling from the rubbish, all of those messages, but also talking to them about maybe thinking about making some changes in the way they used energy. And then also finding trusted people who would be the best people to talk to them. And funnily enough, that isn't politicians. I know it's a shock, but it isn't estate agents. It may not even be energy companies, funnily enough, either. So we were mostly doing the training sessions with people who were active in the Residents Association, so that when they popped round with the mythical cup of sugar to their new neighbours to say, welcome, or the pints of milk, they could also have that conversation about, energy use, who their supplier was, how they were, receiving and using energy. Now that's for social housing tenants, and it is really difficult if you don't own your own property. But there is obviously still a lot of people in this country who are neither in social housing or the private rented sector. So thinking about them, and I do think that has anybody here got solar panels on their roof? Yes, so we're rivals to E.ON. I mean, tiny rivals, obviously. Very tiny rivals. Okay, very, very tiny. But we... Yeah, yeah, I can supply you. Very probably do. But the point that I'm making is that we're no longer just consumers, which is what we were just saying about energy. We are producers as well, or as somebody kept trying to make me say for over the years, and I don't like it, but prosumers. So we're both producers and consumers. I know it's horrible. It's a horrible acronym. I really don't like it at all. So why aren't more of us? Well, because as I think we all know, I mean, I fitted my panels at the height of the feed-in tariff, I'm very pleased to say, and that's been very nice for me. But then I was able to do that. Lots of people perhaps weren't. And then, of course, the feed-in tariff was essentially destroyed by the forces of evil and darkness, otherwise known as the previous government. Sorry to be slightly political there. But it is really important that I've done that because it has completely changed the way in which I consume electricity, because I wanted to know when I was producing electricity as well as using it. And in the last couple of years, the Mayor of London introduced a scheme called Solar Together, which has had its problems and issues because one of the companies that got onto the framework went bust, actually. So we'll draw a veil over that. But that was another way of, it was a reverse auction, and companies were then participating with local authorities, encouraging people to fit solar onto their roofs, and also to fit batteries as well. And that's where I haven't gone, and I should, and I still need to, is to get battery. Why is this so important? And this might be a slightly left field here, but if you look at the bigger picture and what we're encouraging people to do, there's a lot of conversation about moving people onto heat pumps and away from gas. I was on another panel yesterday talking about greening the gas grid. There's a lot of people who want us to continue to use perhaps different forms of gas. But, you know, there is still a push away from gas. If we are going to encourage more electrification in homes, and heat pumps are not zero energy, they are low energy, and they use a certain amount of electrical input. They have a very good coefficient of performance if you're fabric first and you've done your property properly, but they do still use electricity. We're also talking about moving everybody into electric cars or plug-in hybrids. So we're looking at a massive increase in the use as well. So it's not just about flexibility in terms of what people do in their homes. I think we're also going to have to talk far more seriously, not just about plugging in your vehicle and sucking the electricity out of the grid, but also seeing a car that has a battery in it as a backup to the grid, so you get vehicle to grid as well as grid to vehicle. And we are going to have to start envisioning the whole way that we work in a very different way. So we're not just consumers, we are producers, and our cars are not just sucking energy out, but that they are also giving it back. And as my house does, gives back a little bit to the grid, as well as allowing me to live rent-free, or in terms of energy consumption, pretty much for about 5 months a year. If you're clever with your energy use, you can do that. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to come back on something that Leonie said there?
Well, no, it's just building on it. So, I mean, it's just building on it. So, there's loads of reasons to be optimistic. If I look at other markets that we operate in, so if you and some that we don't. So, you know, if you go to the Netherlands, for example, the level of penetration of rooftop solar in the Netherlands is, by comparison to the UK, huge. Now, some of the subsidies that have driven that, the netting scheme, propose challenges for energy retailers, but those are challenges that, you know, I'd much rather be overcoming those challenges than, quite honestly, being in the world that we are in today in the UK. Because, you know, yes, huge volumes of residential solar on the grid pose challenges to the grid operator, they pose challenges to our trading desk in terms of the kind of, the market itself changes. Residential solar, rooftop solar, starts to set the market price at certain times a day. And what that means is that there's huge swathes of people in the Netherlands who are benefiting from electricity prices that are, at worst far more affordable than that which they are today, and in many cases close to zero. And the battery point is really important. And can you do this in social housing? Can you do this in non-owner occupied? Absolutely, you can. There's a business called Illume that we have an investment in, which does behind-the-meter solar sharing for mid-size apartment blocks. This is sharing the solar output from on the roof of a mid-size apartment block equitably with the residents there. The housing association can retain the export value if that's what makes it economic for them. The residents get the benefit of the solar output and the reduction in their electricity bill. That product works extremely well and is starting to work extremely well in the UK in social housing. Just as one example, the pilot that we started in Coventry, where to the point in terms of how do you engage through a trusted partner, working with Coventry City Council to identify low-income families, battery in the property, insulation, battery, time of use tariff in the property. The saving that generates is roughly double double the level of the Warm Homes discount. Yes. We're about to take that, we're starting to scale that in Glasgow. Again, working in that case with the council, working with the WISE group to make sure that you've got trusted partners who you can access people who won't trust their energy company, they won't trust the politician, they won't trust, they very low levels of trust in society as a whole. But working with a trusted partner, share data, get the proposition into the hands of the people who need it most. The benefit you deliver is far in excess of the benefit of what somebody would receive through the Warm Homes discount. The point being, it is more than doable to scale consumer flex in those sections of the population who need the benefit. And when I look at other markets around Europe, you go to Australia, you see the same thing. You see huge volumes of solar and battery uptake. You see a far more decentralized energy system. It is absolutely possible to do this. And that, to the point that Caroline made earlier, I think we need to understand in the UK that there is an absolute limitation to top-down central spatial planning of an energy system. And you have to be willing to embrace a more decentralised, more flexible energy system if you want to bring bills down and decarbonise.
So the Clean Energy Mission has been quietly ticking over, probably too quietly for us at SERA. We'd like to be seeing more of it front and centre of the government's agenda. What more would you like to see from government on this agenda specifically? I know, Caroline, you started to pick on a few bits, but what more could we be doing? We've got some great people in there, having Chris Stark, Mission Control. You've got brilliant brains. People like this who are telling me that this is all possible. The grid was able to do this 15 years ago. We've been dilly-dallying. So how do we get that? How would you get it to move faster? And who'd like to go first?
I can start, I guess. I think two things I'd probably say. I think the first is that it's quite interesting, I think, politically at the minute with the introduction of an independent NESO. It raises quite different challenges to where we've been before, where National Grid was a private company. That raises this interesting question because in some respects, DESNZ is giving away the leverage that it had to really make some of these decisions to an independent body that needs to take its own view. And that means that really for DESNZ, their ability to show leadership and a clear kind of strategic direction, and that where difficult decisions are going to be made, they are going to keep to the plan, becomes even more important, I think. The second thing, I think, is the flexibility sector has been a victim of decades of buck passing between different organisations. If it's not Ofgem's fault, it's NESO's fault. If it's not NESO's fault, it's Ofgem's fault, etc., 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 forever. There needs to be very clear accountability and some consequences if things are not moving forward in the way that we need them to. We know lots of these answers. The previous, clean flexibility roadmap of 5 years ago, it's not dissimilar from where we are today. What's needed is the accountability to move quickly. And the final thing, I guess I would say, we're talking a lot. This government really wants to see a renewal of electricity and energy infrastructure overall in this country. We're completely on board with that. But we can't forget that what we're talking about, which feels more ephemeral, a bit more hidden in terms of digitalisation, the IT systems that we need, market half-hourly settlement, etc., metering. This stuff is going to take a whole load of time as well. To underestimate how long this is going to take and leave it to 2029 and think, oh my gosh, right, okay, we just got to get NESO's IT systems a bit more sorted. You are on a hiding to complete failure at that point. We need to be clear-eyed that this is going to take a whole load of work and it needs to start now.
I can go. So I think just sort of picking up on the points Caroline's already made, I think one of the things we do desperately need to sort out is the clarity on the roles and responsibilities in this space, just because the new system is much more complex with new actors coming in, and there isn't the level of clarity that we need to really drive this forward. So for my sins, one of the things I've recently done is acted as an independent expert on the government's review of Ofgem, which there will be more news on that coming later this year. But I think that has been a really helpful process in sort of driving some of that additional clarity that we need. And I think the other thing too is just sort of, for this to be a success, we are at a really tricky point in the transition. We've sort of had a bit of a breakdown in the cross-party consensus we've had around the transition over the past couple of years. It is a much more difficult sell to the public in some ways, and people need to start feeling the benefits of the transition. We need to be making progress on lower bills. We need to start demonstrating the fact that, there will be movement here. Otherwise, it is going to get even trickier. So, that's why we're fans of flexibility, because we can see that it will lead to benefits for people. But we've just got to get the right processes in place to make sure that that actually happens and people can feel it in their pocketbooks.
The Halicon days of the Clean Energy Act, it was a Clean Act passing unanimously and cross-party consensus, feels completely smashed. I was one of the recipients of Richard Tice's net stupid zero letters, and it makes me livid to this day, because actually our renewables portfolio is one of the better performing ones in our local government pension schemes. It makes me absolutely livid that they're trying to damage the progress we made on this.
Well, there's a couple of things. So one, just straying into the politics for a second. So take Coventry, where the battery pilot that I mentioned, which makes a material difference to people living in fuel poverty in Coventry through flexibility. There's a local election in May in Coventry. If that council flips, and we do that because it's part of a 15-year strategic energy partnership with the City of Coventry that enables us to share that type of data and gives us confidence to invest in the city. And there's £2 billion worth of investment that we can potentially bring to the City of Coventry over the 15 years of that partnership. That's not insignificant, and it sits as part of a plan to regenerate the city. If in a local election you end up in a situation where you flip from a Labour council to a Reform council, and that Reform council then starts to act on the statements that they're publicly made in terms of objection to net zero projects, everything that we're doing there, all of the investment that we want to make in that city, falls under the banner of net zero projects. So now that's one of our home cities. We're not about to walk away from it because we employ people there. It's a city where we've got a deep heritage. But when I'm competing for CapEx, when I'm competing for capital with my counterparts in every other European market in which E.ON operates, which is pretty much every country in Europe other than France, it is a hell of a lot harder when I go to Eston and say, I want several hundred million, billions of pounds worth of capital to invest. Where do you want to invest it, Chris? I want to invest it here. What are the political conditions? So that's it's not what I intended to talk about, but that matters, yeah? So to Gillian's point, people have to feel the benefits of the energy transition in their pockets today. And so on the one hand, really encouraged that the £13.2 billion for the Warm Homes Plan was ring-fenced in the recent spending review. Really optimistic that residential solar and battery will be at the heart of that, and flex will be at the heart of that, given the conversations that we've had with all of the ministers and the department. So that, I think, is really positive, but we need to make sure that we get that funding away. We need to make sure that we do so at scale and that we harness the power of working with local authorities, working with communities to do that, so people see the benefit as soon as possible in this electoral cycle. But optimistic about that. I think there are some practical things that government need to do. So Gillian touched on it earlier, and we moved on, which was we need to complete the smart rollout. All of this stuff is contingent upon somebody having a smart meter in their property. We need to, market-wide half-hourly settlement is a step forward, but the banking system, through a clearing bank, settles in tenths of a second. So market-wide half-hourly settlement is a step forward, but you could go so much further. So how do we get that done? How do we move on to something which is even better to enable these propositions to be even better for customers? So there's some practical things there. Regulation. Ofgem have a duty, which is to regulate for today's and tomorrow's customer. The statements the Prime Minister made yesterday morning, targeting 25% reduction in regulation in each of the respective segments is welcome. But when it comes to the regulation of the energy sector, then a greater focus on the consumer of tomorrow is hugely important. Not regulating for yesterday's market, which is high volume switching predicated, regulating as well, and that's don't misunderstand me. Competition is important whilst you have a liberalised market. Helping customers switch is hugely important. But also regulating for the consumer of tomorrow and helping bring that future forward to today, where you have a consumer market that is regulated in such a way that it is conducive to these type of flexible propositions, is hugely important. And Ofgem need to do more in that space, and government can incentivise Ofgem to do more in that space and to do more quickly, because when I look at the regulation of the retail energy market in the UK versus, for example, the regulation of the retail market in Australia or in the Netherlands or in many other markets are far more conducive to a consumer flex proposition at scale than the regulation of the retail market in the UK today. And at its most basic, that's about how do you move from regulation, which is granular regulation for edge cases, to one which is much more outcome focused in terms of how do we ensure fair consumer outcomes whilst at the same time enabling innovation in the market. And don't misunderstand me, this isn't me bleating about profitability. This is about how do you make sure that we have a market which works for customers in a world of flex, in a world of highly personalised energy consumption and energy usage. Ofgem need to do more there, and government can help.
Like that, less but future fit, smarter regulation. And I think that should be the mantra. As we get too political with bonfires and quangos, but some of this stuff is deeply technical. Those who had to suffer through reading Ofgem guidance notes, they are long and tedious often and need a lot of legal interpretation. But we need to be smart and be thinking about what the future markets are like. Leonie, do you want to come in on this, and then we'll throw open to questions? I've seen a couple of indications, but be ready for your questions.
Yeah, just briefly. I don't want to talk about that side of things, and certainly don't want to talk about Ofgem guidance. I'll have to go to the bar for a drink before I talk about Ofgem. I mean, I did a show of hands over who's got solar. Is anybody here a member of their local community energy group? Oh, is it just me? Oh, two. So when we were talking about, Chris was just talking about the need for, those trusted communities and getting into communities and working with local authorities. I can't emphasise enough how important it is to work with local community energy groups. And if you haven't joined yours locally, I'm going to tell you to join SERA, obviously, because you're in a SERA meeting, and there's lots of leaflets with our, scan the QR code and join, because it helps us do these really important meetings. But join your local community energy group, because that is also another way to find the people who start to have that understanding of how the markets work, how the money behind the markets works as well, but also have that trusted relationship with individuals who live in housing. So I'm going to talk about my own local community energy group. It's called Cllr Energy. We had to put energy on the end. Cllr stands for Community Renewable Energy Wandsworth, but we don't just operate in Wandsworth anymore. We operate in Hackney and a few other boroughs. And we've got experts who are fellow directors with me who are the ones who swallowed the Ofgem guidance at birth and could regurgitate it, probably not in a language that anyone could understand, who put together the bids, and also we are able to engage local people in also sometimes putting in some of their own funding. It's not the large capex that you might be looking for, but it will fund schemes, and then we have a series of people who go into people's houses and talk to people about how to flex their usage. So we have a series of energy advisors who we fund through other activities. There's a bit of grant goes in as well, and one of the things that the government can and should do is support local community energy groups so that you've got that network, even if they're not involved in putting solar on roofs or heat pumps into places, with all the things that we've been doing, sports halls, a business centre, so on and so forth. They will have that network of energy advisors who are highly trusted, who have been trained and will be able to go into people's homes and talk to them about what they really need to do to flex their usage and to change what they're doing. And this, we haven't used the words cost of living crisis much yet on this panel, but talking about bringing down people's bills even more than the warm homes discount is addressing the cost of living crisis like nothing else on earth. And that's what our energy advisors, and there's a network of them across London, because when the Rural Community Energy Fund and the Urban Community Energy Fund were cancelled under the previous government, from 2017 onwards, the Mayor of London created the London Community Energy Fund and carried on funding, and there's about 150 groups funded, and it's not terawatts of power from people's roofs or things like that, obviously, but there's a significant number of megawatts being produced of completely zero carbon. So I would like to see the government funding those groups, particularly because of the energy advice and the advice that they can give to communities about how to flex.
Fantastic. I want to throw Chris, you want to come in there, and then we'll open questions.
Just to Leonie's point, community energy is hugely important. So
E.ON supports as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember, it's in the next couple of months. So there's a school in Canning in East London where we've oversized the solar array. We'll connect residents and businesses through a virtual private wire network to really prove the point that you can do energy communities in the UK, because we do them in Bavaria, we do them in Italy, we've done them in Spain. You can do them in the UK. That should be very much a community enterprise that we've got some capability that you can help with. To your point in terms of what government can do, there is a simple change of regulation that would make those economically viable at huge scale in the UK. Which is about exempting those communities from the duos charges. So just really, really important point.
Yeah, I believe it's a very active co-op party campaign on this as well, so I think which is great to see.
Certainly is. I sit as a Labour and Cooperative Assembly member, so of course.
So I've seen two hands already, but I want one, and a lady there. So there's the person in purple, chap over here, and then the lady over there. If you just say your name and which organisation you represent briefly, and if the question's directed at individual or the group.
My name's Alex, and I'm a Labour member. I'm going to be very brief and just give you some context to this question.
Very brief, though.
I consider myself a sophisticated energy user. I have 2 electric cars, heat pump, battery, solar. I have a 2-year-old, so the tumble dryer never turns off. I use 12,000 kilowatts a year in a 2 up, 2 down. The Energy Saving Trust calculator for benefits conks out at 6,000 kilowatts. But it cost me £80 a month because I'm an agile, sorry, Chris, user. So it's sophisticated. How do we make sure that we have a just transition to flexible use? Because you can't access a comparison for agile tariffs, time of use tariffs, whatever you want to call them, and you need a certain kind of switch into the psychology, and the people that probably need this the most aren't going to engage on that level at the moment.
A question. I hope next time you're asking a question, you'll be a Labour councillor doing that in your borough and helping lead people using that knowledge. But let's get the 3 questions. Fantastic. Come and knock some doors for you. The lady over in the... Oh, sorry, that doesn't matter which order. Yeah. There you go.
Thanks. Alex Murley, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. We're a fund manager. We're the largest investor in battery energy storage in the UK. We're building 1.5 gig up in Scotland at the moment, which should help with constraints and such management. So lowering bills, big theme in this conference. I think we all appreciate that the answer to optimising bills is made up of improvements of policy and various other actions in different segments of our broader market, whether it's in the generation or wholesale market, whether it's in how and where we build network, how we operate the system, retail market, and then end user demand, energy efficiency, such like. So the answer is made up of lots of different actions in lots of different segments. There's a lot of focus in this session on the retail segment in particular, but could the panel compare and contrast the relative contribution to lowering bills by creating flexibility in the system in the retail versus the more upstream wholesale market? Thank you.
Brilliant. Very, very good question. And then last but not least, and then please indicate which of the ones you want to jump in. We'll try and spread it out.
Hi, I'm Jen from Seahorse Environmental. We're a comms agency. We work with a group called Flex Machine, so went with the same type of vibe as you did. It's basically OVO, Octopus, Sonobi, kind of the big tech businesses in flexibility. I've just been over a panel with the New Statesman with Martin McCluskey on clean heat, clean power and energy security, and flexibility didn't come up once in an hour, which seems a little bit mad. And I'm basically just intrigued to hear from the panel, like, how do we make sure that flex is just part of the conversation? Like, we've been talking about wind, we've been talking about solar for a really long time. Consumers are never going to get on board with this. It's not naturally coming up in these conversations. So how do we take it from a group of what is probably energy wonks, I am, and like help consumers understand that this is just part of the transition and something they can trust?
It's wonderful to be in a safe space around stuff, because this is a very niche, potentially a very niche topic. But who wants to go first? I think the price piece is also part of the answer here. But
yeah. I can go first on some of those. So in terms of the just transition piece, so really looking for the Warm Homes plan to sort of kickstart a lot of this. In terms of sort of how you do this, I kind of addressing both of your questions in that respect. It's up to the companies and the innovators in this space to come up with really compelling propositions for people. They have to make it as easy as possible. And I know you're shaking your head. There are things coming with market-wide half-hourly settlement. It will become more in their interest to be able to do that, because that's one of the big challenges we've got at the moment. With market-wide, that does open that up. So there is the sort of coming up, and then there needs to be that investment in advice and supporting people to take up these propositions. So obviously, community energy groups, organizations such as ourselves can help with that, because we need to get at the people that wouldn't naturally respond to those advertisements. We need to show that there's something in it for them, and particularly coming up with propositions that are targeted at people living in flats, people targeted at living in the private rented sector is really, really key to helping support that just transition.
Your point's a really important one, yeah. So, I understand the sentiment that it absolutely is in our best interests for you to be able to compare flex propositions and agile tariffs. And because nobody benefits, the consumer doesn't benefit, and ultimately, our retail business doesn't benefit from a market in which customers can't make simple and fair comparisons, because then you don't have a competitive market. And I get that there's do you want a competitive market or do you want something else? But if you've chosen for a competitive market, then simple, easy, fair comparison is in everybody's best interest there. Now, how you do that with these type of propositions is something that we've not yet figured out properly in the UK. I think your point in terms of how much, you're obviously very engaged, you're benefiting from that. But how do you bring a proposition to market which doesn't require that level of engagement. So, there's a solar and battery prop that I think we launched it 2 weeks ago with a wait list of, it's with an Australian business, Amber, partner of ours. That is different to the agile prop, which we also do because we run the same technology as Octo. But what it's doing is it's taking your home, and in its simplest form, it's effectively, rather than aggregating the flexibility with all of the customers on our book, it's simply enabling your home to access the different energy markets, almost as if it was a mini commercial battery and commercial solar farm. The beauty of it is it's just dead simple. The front end of it is dead simple. The digital front end is really simple, it's really clear, and all you need to do is click. You can be a day trader if you want to. I wouldn't advise it. Or you just click automate, and the algorithm does it for you. You've got a really simple front end. It tells you really clearly what you're benefiting from and why you're benefiting from it. And that, the simplicity of that proposition, which is different, go and have a look at it. But it's, and others can do the same thing. It's not about us per se. It's just about saying, how do I take those agile propositions, make them as simple as possible in terms of, the grid is in this position, therefore it's best for you, you're exporting. The grid is in this position, therefore you're consuming. Automate that for the customer, make the digital front end simple. And if all of the propositions look like that, then it becomes really simple for you to do a comparison. Which one of these is best for me? And then Gillian's point in terms of those people who are providing advice, the community energy advisors, it's really simple for them to provide that advice. So that's one thing. And I think again, when you look at other markets where this happens, that type of comparison becomes easier and easier. So I think you'll get there. I think the question in terms of grid scale batteries and the investment in large asset flexibility is really important. So, we've talked a lot about consumer flex because, that's what's closest to home. That's what's closest to everybody's heart. But, I don't personally see that there is, it's not an either or. It's not an either or case. We are around Europe, including the UK, an investor in grid scale flexible assets. I'd like to be able to do more in the UK. Happy to talk to you about that. But throughout Europe, we're an investor in grid scale flex. They're doing fundamentally different things in the energy. They're doing different things to an extent in the energy system. You look at the Clean Power 2030 plan. All that tells me is both consumer flex and batteries, long duration storage, etc., have a significant role to play in the energy system of the future. All I know from looking at the numbers in the Clean Power 2030 plan is that they're undercooked, that there will be more flexibility that's ultimately required of all types. And if we can get it right and we can bring it to scale quickly, then flexibility in all its forms will bring the overall system cost down. So therefore, I would be personally bullish about both consumer flex and batteries, etc., in the UK for many years to come. I think also in the UK, longer duration storage is something that is significantly under-indexed and something that we need to focus on. So I don't see it as an either-or question in terms of where do you put your bets and where do you put your money and what's investable. They all have a role to play. It's all important. And ultimately, it has the opportunity to bring the overall system cost down.
Caroline, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a couple of those. To your point, so we, as a sort of subsidiary company of ourselves, we run something called FlexAssure, which is a kind of voluntary code of conduct. I think for flexibility aggregators, so those people in the market who are not yet regulated but will be over the next couple of years. I think there's a couple of things that have been super interesting about the experience we've had of that over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, I would say. I think the first thing is that, kind of building on Chris's point, the other thing we see, suppliers have a really important role, and you can see regulation starting to emerge. I think we're also starting to see a sense actually where, particularly sort of EV tariffs, for example, flex should just be default. It's not really a, do you want done one, do you want flex? You should just don't charge your car at peak, right? And we'll do something better for you. The thing we have found though with Flex Assure that I think is really interesting is there is a complexity around the supply chain of flexibility that I think sometimes is lost. So we see lots of innovators who, for example, are doing the specialist B2C and then are backing it off to much bigger companies like E.ON or Flexitricity, etc. And it's really important that they get the right regulation, but also there's a place for them in this market because they're often providing really good, quite innovative services that are needed to get more people involved. So that would be the first thing I think. In terms of upstream versus downstream, completely agree.
It's not about versus, it's about relative contribution to the organisation.
Both.
That was the question.
Both.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what we're heading for, I guess, is 12 gigawatts by 2030. I think is something that the industry sees as realistic, if not perhaps where we can go a little bit even further if we really got the kind of wind in our sails. I think there's two really important things we see in terms of that. I think the first is that this story around what is this government's narrative on bills is just going to get worse. Right? We already have Ofgem kind of draft decisions that are looking at adding significant amounts of money onto the bill as a result of transmission network infrastructure. We'll probably see the same in the next couple of years in terms of distribution. We've seen a relatively high offshore wind auction this time around. And we do need to get control of constraints as something that those who would take us down are really going at. So I think the first thing I would say is that flexibility, particularly for those where we can deliver savings directly to people's pockets, it's something that we can do in the next few years and do quickly, and that's really important. But the second thing, I think, is that if we don't start this now, we're just saving up further problems again and again and again into the 2030s, when we will need significant levels again of flexibility. And then, to the point about heat, you missed my opening remarks in which I particularly said how important heat is for flexibility. I think the thing I would just add to that, and perhaps we can have a conversation, if you look in Europe, there are fascinating ways in which people are using the heat decarbonisation as another boon to the way in which we keep lights on. So, we can see, for example, if you look at large-scale heat networks that people are building in towns and cities, they're putting in what is effectively a kettle, but a building level kettle, in order that we can get off-peak electricity and then use that to create low-cost heating. That's amazing. And then we could go even bigger again. You're seeing in some countries, for example, in Scandinavia and elsewhere, the use of something called pit storage, which is effectively interseasonal storage. It's heating the ground over the summer and then using that in the winter. That's the sort of stuff that we need to be thinking about really, really clearly. But at the minute, we don't have the tools. What I'm really hopeful is that the Warm Homes Plan says very, very clearly part of this heat story is about flexibility, and says that unequivocally. But I think more than that, what we find, particularly in DESNZ, for example, it is still very, very hard to have a conversation with people who are specialists in power about the opportunity that is there on the heat side, and it's very hard to have conversation about the electricity market and the opportunity it may bring to those who are specialising in heat.
And we're at risk of opening a massive can of worms in the last minute and a half of this. I mean, I think one of the projects I enjoy visiting the most in Camden is our hospital waste heat into the Gospel Oak estates, like a real, just to put the language of just transition. That's where you see that heat being used and being impactful. And I just don't hear enough of that. And it's so frustrating because it's not been sexy enough. And I think sometimes some of this stuff feels we kind of want it to be up the agenda, and we're the only party that's seriously talking about these issues. Everyone else has stopped being grown-ups. It's a real nightmare for me. How do we bring that coalition, that sort of consensus back? And I'm so conscious of time, so I want to give each of the panelists the last sort of 15 seconds just of what one thing would you like to see changed by this time next year. So we're back at conference at SERA Fringe talking about flexibility. What has happened in that in next year that will make you give us a reason for optimism as we leave this panel?
Who wants to start?
You look like you wanted to start, Caroline.
No. Okay, the one thing I would like to see, I guess, is Ed Miliband standing up at this conference next year and saying this is what we've managed to do on the flexibility roadmap. We're on track, and these are the things I'm going to knock Ofgem and NISO heads together if we're not.
I would say, yeah, the Warm Homes Plan has been published. There's been great interest. There's been a huge investment in advice in sort of supporting all people across the country to be able to take up these propositions. And there's just a massive increase in the number of people on smart, flexible products.
Chris?
All of the above. I would just to the point, I think there you are. You talked about being with Martin earlier, and the topic of flex doesn't come up. I kind of get why that is today. Whether it's assets, whether it's consumer flex, we just want to be standing in a result in 12 months' time where, to the point that's been made earlier, not only are people talking about flexibility as being one of the key features of the future energy system, but when I go and talk to mission control, when I go and talk to ministers, when I go and talk to DESNES, then right now it is really easy to get a hearing on large-scale asset investment and large-scale infrastructure investment. I would like to have the same experience when it comes to investment in all of the things that sit behind flexibility in all its forms. That would be great.
Leonie?
All of the above, and I think particularly a really good warm homes plan that is able to really see us delivering on the cost of living issue for individuals who are really struggling with their energy bills, and flex in the way that people use their energy has to be part of that, and we have to make sure it is part of the discussion, to answer the point that was made, in a way that is meaningful to politicians and then meaningful to people. I, when I first started driving, used to ride motorbikes, and I could take the engines apart and I could put them back together again. I now drive a hybrid car. I wouldn't dream of, apart from opening the bonnet and looking at the engine, doing absolutely nothing with it. You can make things very functional, but we don't all have to fix them. We don't even have to know how they work anymore. And getting people on that trip through that transition towards the cost of living crisis being tackled for them individually, they don't even have to know how it works. They just need to press the button and make it work. That has to be in there.
So I found this hugely informative. I've learned so much from our panellists. I will be taking it to DESNES, to Tobias and the whole team, and Ed will have no choice but to listen to this, and I'll drip it as much as we can to Cllr's ear as one of the councillors in his patch as much as we can. But if you are not members of SERA already, why not join up before you leave? This is the place where the conversations are happening. We're grown-up conversations. Ben is modelling a beautiful QR code for you to sign up and scan there. But I just want to thank the audience, and then also thank our panel, who've been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much today, and it's been a really engaging discussion. So a huge thank you, and enjoy the leaders' speak.